Many of you may be feeling overwhelmed. All the stories of the students that have passed or your friends are starting to haunt you. The failure rates of all these subjects in university can be terrifying, and you're wondering, what makes me special? Surely I'll be like the next individual and fail that module. I'm here to tell you this doesn't have to be you. You can be part of the few that actually passes and overcomes these difficult subjects. Hi, my name is Khandim Shumane, chartered accountant and learning strategist. And in today's video, we'll be talking about some of the tricks and tips that you need to implement today if you want to be able to overcome insanely difficult subjects. Let me tell you, this video is quite comprehensive. We'll be talking about simple things that you can do today, such as behavioral changes, as well as uncovering the three important elements that always underpin the difficulty of subjects. And for each element, finding out what exactly can you do in order to overcome the difficulty of that subject. And then lastly, we'll be looking at some practical tips on what can you do to also increase your ability to be able to be successful in these difficult subjects. Make sure you watch till the end so that you can get the full benefit of the video. Now, let's go straight into it. The first thing that you need to do before you start worrying about whether a subject is difficult is actually identifying, is the subject actually difficult? Now, the majority of students often make the misconception or the mistake that just because a subject is yielding results that are low, it means that it's difficult. Sometimes you firstly need to do an introspection to say, am I actually applying the correct study strategy? Now, for those who are new to our channel or you haven't heard about some of these tips, check out this video that we did recently about the secret study strategy that outlines some of the key strategies that you need to implement to be successful. Now, basically, what you need to be asking yourself is a series of questions to say, firstly, did you attend all your classes with a purpose, understanding why and how and where you're going to apply the principle? Have you been post reading consistently, applying concepts like the 24-hour rule to ensure that you consolidate information quickly? Are you doing all the prescribed tutorials and practice questions? For each practice questions that you're doing, are you doing it under exam condition? Are you actually marking the script after you've attempted the questions to make sure that where got something wrong, you actually find out why you got it wrong? Are you consulting, engaging with lecturers and tutors to ensure that you're understanding the concepts? And lastly, are you making sure every week you're up to date with all that work that was covered? If at a minimum you're answering no to these questions, it may mean that the strategy that you're implementing is not correct and is inefficient for you to be able to be successful. So always firstly understand, am I correctly applying the right strategy, and make sure you fix that first. Then, assuming that now your strategy is actually corrected and it's implemented efficiently, and you're actually answering the affirmative or yes to these questions that we just covered, the next step is to check your mindset. Now, I recall in my own experience, when I first went on campus, I was in residence, and everyone was saying Finak Charles. Now, these words started to haunt me when I got to second year, and I let it engulf me and I let it dictate to me what my abilities were. And often I found that once I started uncapturing myself from that rhetoric or from those statements and starting to realize that actually I'm an independent person and my own abilities will be unique to everyone else's, and if I apply myself, I will do well. The minute I changed my mindset on that subject and started believing myself, I noticed that I started doing well in this Finet 2 subject. The same is true for you. Make sure that you have the correct mindset, that you believe in yourself. It's not a coincidence that you're doing the subject. The fact that you're there means that you are capable of becoming successful. All you need to do is believe in yourself and make sure you surround yourself with the individuals who have a positive mindset that can reinforce these positive attitudes so that you can become successful. Now, assuming then your mindset is now correct and it's in the correct frame of mind, the next step is to take a deep dive and actually understand what are the root causes that make subjects difficult. Now, in my own personal experience, I found there are three main things that cause subjects to be difficult. Understand these three elements and how you can address them will be to your advantage in order to be able to overcome these difficult subjects. Now, although some subjects usually exhibit one or two or even just three of these qualities, all these skills are important. It's important that as we go through them, you identify what's making that subject difficult, and you might find you have to apply one, two, or three of these principles all together in order to become successful. Now, let's go to the first one. The first reason why subjects are difficult is because of the volume of work. Now, in my experience, I had a subject called taxation, which I did from my second to fourth year up until I left varsity. And what I found with this subject is that it was volume intensive. It was a theory subject that was embedded in the law and had a lot of text that I needed to read before I could start attempting the tutorials. What I found is that I was spending hours and hours and hours on end trying to just capture the essence of what the subject was all about. And before I knew it, the time was ticking. Already the lecturers were on to the next week, and I hadn't even attempted the tutorials for that week. So I was always under this constant cycle of being behind. And as a result, it showed when it came to tests and exams, I didn't do well. So what can you do? Perhaps not, you might be doing a subject similar to mine, which is theory intensive. How do you address this? The first thing you need to understand is that learning is all about context. Now, I've reiterated this concept in all my videos because it's so important, and I'm repeating it today. Context is the bedrock of learning. When you understand the context of where this principle comes from and what it's trying to achieve, you are more likely to understand it and learn quicker, as opposed to someone who simply reads a textbook without any context and tries to memorize things. So, how do you get this context? The best way by far to get context is attending classes with a purpose. Now, when you go to classes, ask the right questions. Right? And we talk about this in our previous videos, right? You need to ask the question of why is this principle important? What is the trigger that will help me address this issue in a test and exam? And what should I be looking out for to know to apply this principle? Asking these relevant questions will help you get the necessary context required so that by the time you do your post reading for these theory intensive subjects, you're actually going to start reading with a purpose. Because the nature of theory subjects is that there's a lot of fluff, there's a lot of text that embeds the principles. So when you understand the core essence of what you're trying to learn, you can easily look at a textbook now and start stripping out the unnecessary information and focusing only on the core information that enhances your understanding. Once I started doing this, I noticed that I was spending less time now on this theory subject. So I was unlocking more time to do more questions. And naturally, because I was doing more questions, I was then able to then do better in the subject. Another important thing that you need to highlight and remember with theory subjects is that your ability to read the first time will not dictate how successful you become. Our brains do this weird thing where when you read text for the first time, you actually want to grab the first words that come to mind and you want to memorize, and you find yourself spending about 20 to 30 minutes on the first page because you're so worried that if you don't get the first page, you won't get the rest of the text. This is a fallacy. You need to fight against this temptation. At the core of learning, again, is embedded in prior knowledge. Now, your lecturers, I can reassure you now, they also can't memorize that textbook. Then the question is, why are you trying to memorize it? There simply is no point. What's more practical is rather reading that textbook as if it was like a novel, right? Because you've got the context now from either attending classes or if you don't attend classes, from watching videos before you actually read the textbook. Now you've got the right context. So now as you read, treat it like a novel. Don't put pressure on yourself. Simply read it for understanding. If something doesn't make sense, just make a note on the side and continue reading. Continue reading and be done. You'll find that by the end of the text, everything will start making sense rather than trying to focus on a single page. And at the end, remember, you also still need to do your questions. And as you do your questions under exam pressure, you will naturally get things wrong. What I found when I was doing my tax questions now, because I was spending less time reading, I was doing more time doing the tutorials, then I would naturally get something wrong. When I got something wrong, I had to go back to the legislation, back to the textbook to understand actually why did I get this wrong. And then I went back to do further questions. This back and forth between doing questions and actually going back to the textbook and reading the legislation was actually a more effective way of learning, as opposed to just rote learning a textbook all on its own. So make sure that you do that. Rather, space out your learning and go between doing questions and learning and over again. And that's more effective in order to tackle these volume intensive subjects, right? The next reason or element that causes subjects to be difficult is because of how you're expected to answer the questions. Now, often some of the subjects truly the outcome is based on your ability to write in the correct way. Now, a subject for me that was like this was auditing. Now, auditing is a practical subject in the accounting space where the whole premise of the module or discipline is to help practitioners, in this case auditors, be able to go into companies and basically assess that the company is well run, controls are efficient, and that all the financial records are appropriate, so that they can ultimately provide an opinion that reassures investors and people who want to invest in companies that everything is going well in that business. That's the big picture of what auditing tries to achieve. The problem was that I was focusing too much on reading the text, only to find out that subject was all about how practical you could become. So naturally, if you wanted to be successful here, it was all about how you were writing. I found that the more I started learning and reading textbooks too much, I then spent less time on doing questions. And I found out that I was actually struggling when it came to tests and exams, even though I had studied all the text. So what's important for these type of subjects that are so practical, and other subjects that are like this are, for example, you may be submitting essays for subject assignments, all these practical type of subjects. At the core of being able to deal with these subjects is understanding the importance of actually weighting your learning more towards questions as opposed to reading. Now, usually, right, on normal subjects with an equal split, you might find that a 40%, 60% ratio of reading to doing questions is usually appropriate, where you spend 40% of your time typically reading a textbook and making your notes, and 60% of the time doing the questions. In some instances, you might even find a 30-70 split. But because these subjects are so practical, you might have to go into the position of actually taking only 20% of your time collecting information and rather spending 80%, if not 90%, doing questions. What I found is that by doing questions, I was actually engaged in a more practical manner in that subject, so that I was able to learn more efficiently. Now, of course, you will get things wrong. And the important thing is that in these type of subjects, you mustn't take things personally. You know, there would be times where I would do auditing questions and I would get 1 out of 20, 2 out of 20, and so forth, really extremely low marks in the tutorials. But what I was glad about is that I actually made the mistake now and not in the test and exam. The same approach should hold true when you go and do these type of subjects. Make sure that you have a thick skin. Understand that learning is all about failure, but you must understand where to fail. You don't fail in the test and exam, but rather you fail when you're practicing. The minute I started realizing that, I started embracing the tutorial questions now. And I realized that in the first few tutorials, I am going to do badly. But over time, as I understand why I'm getting things wrong, I consult and I look at the textbook to understand where I went wrong. I'll then become better and better to the point whereby when I get to the last tutorial, I'll be very good at it. Another important tool that you want to implement for these type of practical subjects is that you want to engage your lecturers and tutors regularly and get feedback from them regularly. Now, most students are shy when it comes to these things. And unfortunately, these subjects don't require you, and they don't appreciate people who are shy and stay in their corners. In fact, that is a recipe for disaster, and you will do badly in these subjects. What I found that was effective in these practical subjects that are hinged on how well you are able to write is that I used to submit tutorials for feedback to my lecturers. Because every week I was taking one tutorial and I was getting instantaneous feedback on a weekly basis, I already knew where I was going wrong. So by the time the test came about, I was already prepared because I knew where the mistakes were. I knew what the lecturers were expecting from me when I was supposed to write the questions, when I was supposed to answer them. So therefore, I made less mistakes in the test, and by default, I did well. So make sure you get continuous feedback in order to become successful in these type of subjects. The last reason why subjects can be difficult, and certainly not the least, and most often the common thread of subjects, is that they're inherently difficult. Now, you get to a point where some of these subjects are just difficult just to get the right answer. It's not about volume, it's not about how you write. The subject is just inherently difficult. Now, for me, subjects like this happened at my final year in my fourth year, specifically a subject called finance. Now, finance was quite a practical subject that required you to answer questions. And what I found was that sometimes you would sit there and you do a tutorial, but you wouldn't understand how to actually get to the answer. It would be so tough that you would be demoralized and demotivated and actually not think that you're not intelligent and start doubting whether you can actually complete the course. Now, what's important for these type of subjects that are inherently difficult is, firstly, you have to admit when you're struggling, right? There's no point in you trying to figure out something for hours and hours and hours on end. If it doesn't make sense for the first 30 minutes, leave it, move on to the next question, and then flag it. You're flagging it so that you can go to your lecturer and tutor and go and consult. Go to someone who actually knows what's happening and get the correct answer. What I also found was effective for these type of subjects is actually studying on campus. There's no point in you going into a room, locking yourself up in isolation when you know that you will be struggling there and have no one to be able to give you assistance. What I found is that I studied these subjects during the course of the day when the lecturers and tutors were still on campus, so that when I got something wrong, I could quickly go into their office and get the right answer. That actually gave me the confidence now, because sometimes it's a small thing that's tripping you up that you can get an instant solution to it if you just go and seek help. Another thing that helped for this subject is actually finding that I never studied in isolation. Now, often many of you watching this video are naturally intelligent because you might be in varsity or school and you're doing these difficult subjects. Now, the natural affinity for intelligent people is to believe that they can do things on their own. This simply doesn't cut it for subjects that are difficult, right? Sometimes, even after hours, your lecturers and tutors are not there to help you. Then what? How are you going to get the help? By actually engaging your fellow students, because they might have a solution that, or a way of thinking about the problem that you didn't necessarily think about. That's when it became effective for me to find myself committed to effective study groups. Now, when you engage fellow students, try to look for people with similar interests to you who are equally dedicated and committed. Once I found that I had a study buddy, I knew that if I didn't get the right answer, I would quickly go to them and say, hey, were you able to manage to fix this or find a solution to it? And that actually helped me get the answer instantaneously and give me the confidence, especially after hours when I was studying. So that's also another strategy that you can implement in order to become successful in those type of subjects. Now, the last element, if you want to become successful, is actually implement some practical solutions. Now, practical solutions can be varied, right, in their respects, but they're all important. The first of these practical solutions is getting a mentor or someone who's been there and done that and got the t-shirt. So effectively, sometimes people who are already in practice can be effective mentors to you for difficult subjects because they've already engaged those lecturers. They understand the tricks of the trade. They know how to specifically pass that test and exam that you're about to go and write. So rather try to engage with them because they might give you a different perspective that can help you become successful. Also, what's nice about having mentors that have passed, that they can give you practical solutions, especially if they're already in corporate or practice. They can give you more simpler ways to look at the problem that can equally help you at school. The next important element is doing job shadowing and vacation work. Actually, what I found, especially for for subjects that I talked about earlier in the video, like auditing, is that most of the time we were struggling in these subjects because we didn't understand what was the whole premise behind the subject. What was it trying to achieve? And by actually going to practice and seeing what auditors were doing or what different professionals are doing that are linked to your subject, you can appreciate the subject more. And once you appreciate the subject more, the words like come alive as you read the textbook now, because you know what you're actually trying to achieve. So job shadowing and vacation work is an important tool that I'll encourage you to engage with in order to get more skills and equip yourself with the context required to be successful in your subject. A third element that you can do is also get engaged in your profession or in your subject so that you understand professionally what it will be like in order to be an accountant, an engineer, or whatever you're studying to be. What I found, right, is that when I started reading business news, I knew that I did chartered accountancy because I wanted to be in business. When I started reading business news, when I went back to my lecture notes and went back to read the textbook, though that text started making more sense when I understood what business was all about, what the news were about, and therefore I was more context in doing well. So the same is true for you. Engage articles, go to networking events for individuals in your profession. Try to assimilate yourself as to how is it like to be that professional, and read the relevant articles and get the knowledge outside of school that can help you become successful. Now, hopefully, after watching this video, you're now better equipped to understand some of the practical ways that you can implement today if you want to be able to address difficult subjects head on. Let's chat in the comment section. Let's see, are there any other ideas that you think we could implement in order to be successful in these subjects? Let's chat, let's engage, and I hope that you enjoyed this one and now you've got the tools to become successful. Until we meet again, remember, I believe in you. You can make it. Thanks.